Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Softly Spoken English. I'm Sophia, and I'm so happy you're here today. I hope you're having a lovely day, wherever you're listening from. Today, I'd like to talk about something that many English learners don't think about very often. We spend so much time learning what to say that we sometimes forget there's another important part of every conversation: how we react while someone else is speaking. Have you ever listened to two native English speakers having a conversation? If you have, you may have noticed something interesting. They don't stay completely silent while the other person is talking. Instead, they react with small words and expressions like really, right, or exactly. These little reactions may seem unimportant, but they're actually one of the things that make conversations feel natural and effortless. Now think about your own conversations for a moment. Have you ever been so focused on finding the right words that you forgot to react at all? I think most of us have. We listen carefully. We're thinking about grammar, pronunciation, vocabulary, and by the time we've prepared an answer, the moment to respond naturally has already passed. If that sounds familiar, don't worry. It happens to almost everyone learning a new language. The good news is that reacting naturally doesn't require a huge vocabulary. In fact, many of the expressions we'll talk about today are only 1, 2, or 3 words long. They're simple, but they help the other person feel heard. And when people feel heard, conversations become warmer, more relaxed, and much more enjoyable for everyone involved. Let's start with one of the most common reactions you'll ever hear in English. Really? At first, it seems like such a small word, doesn't it? But depending on the way you say it, it can express surprise, curiosity, interest, or even gentle disbelief. Imagine a friend tells you, "I just got tickets to my favorite band's concert." A simple, "Really?" immediately tells them you'd like to hear more. What's interesting about "really" is that it's rarely the end of your response. Think of it as opening the door to the rest of the conversation. You might say, "Really? That's amazing," or "Really? How did that happen?" or even, "Really? Tell me more." It's a tiny word, but it keeps the conversation moving without making it feel forced. Have you ever noticed that a conversation feels different when the other person reacts to what you're saying? Imagine telling someone an exciting story, and they just stare at you without saying anything. It feels a little strange, doesn't it? Those small reactions let us know the other person is following along, and they encourage us to keep talking. Our next expression is one that people often enjoy using. No way. This one is full of surprise. Imagine your friend says, "I met my favorite actor at the airport yesterday." A natural response could be, "No way, really?" It's friendly, energetic, and it immediately shows that you're excited about what they've just shared. Of course, the tone of your voice is important here. If you say, "No way," very quietly, it can sound like you don't believe the person. But if you smile and say it with genuine excitement, it simply means, "Wow, that's incredible." That's something I really enjoy about English. Sometimes, the meaning comes just as much from your voice as it does from the words themselves. Now, here's a little question for you. Have you ever watched a movie or a TV show in English and heard someone say, "No way"? Maybe you understood the words, but not the feeling behind them. Next time you hear it, pay attention to the person's expression and their tone of voice. I think you'll notice much more than just the vocabulary. Our third reaction is much calmer. I see. I absolutely love this one because it doesn't interrupt the conversation. Instead, it quietly tells the other person, "I'm following you." Imagine someone is explaining why they changed jobs. You don't necessarily need to jump in with advice. Sometimes, simply saying, "I see," is enough to show that you're listening carefully. One thing I'd like to mention is that I see doesn't always mean you agree with someone. It simply means you understand what they're saying. That's an important difference. You can understand another person's point of view without sharing the same opinion, and this little expression lets you communicate exactly that in a polite and natural way. Have you ever noticed that some people make you feel comfortable simply because you know they're listening? They don't interrupt you, they don't rush the conversation, and they don't try to tell a better story. Instead, they react in small, thoughtful ways. I think that's one of the reasons these little expressions are so important. They make conversations feel balanced instead of one-sided. Our next reaction is one you'll hear almost everywhere. Right. It's short, simple, and incredibly useful. Imagine someone is explaining how they solved a problem at work. As they're talking, you can quietly say, "Right," to show you're following the story. It doesn't interrupt them, but it lets them know you're still with them. Something I really like about "right" is that it keeps the conversation flowing. You're not taking control of the discussion, and you're not changing the subject. You're simply encouraging the other person to continue. It's one of those tiny words that native speakers use naturally without even thinking about it, and once you start noticing it, you'll hear it everywhere. Now, think about the last time someone explained something to you. Maybe it was a recipe, directions, or even a story about their weekend. Did you react while they were speaking, or did you stay completely silent until they finished? There isn't a perfect answer, of course, but those small reactions often make the other person feel much more comfortable sharing their thoughts. Our fifth expression is another one of my favorites. Exactly. This is a wonderful way to show that you completely agree with what someone has just said. Imagine a friend says, "The best holidays are the ones where you don't have to rush." You could smile and reply, "Exactly." It's warm, natural, and it creates an instant feeling of connection. I think exactly does something interesting. It tells the other person, "We're thinking the same thing." That little moment of agreement helps people feel understood, and that's something we all enjoy. Conversations aren't only about exchanging information. They're also about discovering the little moments where we relate to each other. I think exactly does something interesting. It tells the other person, "We're thinking the same thing." That little moment of agreement helps people feel understood, and that's something we all enjoy. Conversations aren't only about exchanging information. They're also about discovering the little moments where we relate to each other. Have you ever explained something to someone and wondered if they were actually following you? I think we've all had that feeling at some point. That's why hearing, "That makes sense," can be so reassuring. It tells us our explanation was clear, and it encourages us to continue without worrying that we've confused the other person. One thing I love about this expression is that it doesn't necessarily mean you agree. It simply means you understand the reasoning behind what someone is saying. You can still have a different opinion while showing respect for another person's perspective. And I think that's a wonderful communication skill, not just in English, but in life as well. Our next reaction is one that creates an instant connection. "Oh, I know what you mean." This is something people often say when they've had a similar experience. Imagine your friend says, "Mondays always feel so busy." You might smile and reply, "Oh, I know what you mean." Immediately, the conversation feels more personal because you're sharing the feeling, not just the words. Have you ever noticed how nice it feels when someone truly understands what you're talking about? Sometimes we aren't looking for advice or solutions. We simply want someone to say, "I know what you mean." It's a simple sentence, but it reminds us that we're not alone in what we're experiencing. I think that's one of the reasons it's used so often. Of course, it's important to use this expression honestly. If you've never experienced what the other person is describing, It's perfectly fine not to say it. Authentic conversations aren't about pretending to relate to everything. They're about finding those genuine moments where you really do understand what someone is trying to express. One thing I've learned over the years is that good listeners don't disappear during a conversation. They don't interrupt, but they also don't stay completely silent. Instead, they react in small, natural ways that make the other person feel comfortable continuing. I think that's one of the reasons conversations with good listeners feel so effortless. Let's imagine you're having coffee with a friend. They tell you about a holiday they recently took, and while they're talking, you smile, nod, and say, "Really?" Right. That makes sense. None of these expressions are long or complicated, but together they create something very important. They make the other person feel like you're truly there with them. Sometimes, English learners ask me if they should use these reactions after every sentence, and my answer is no. Just like in your own language, they should feel natural. The goal isn't to fill every silence with words. It's simply to let the other person know you're interested in following what they're saying. Have you ever spoken to someone who never reacted at all? They didn't smile, nod, or say anything while you were talking. It can make you wonder if they're bored or distracted, even if they're actually listening very carefully. That's why these little expressions are so helpful. They give small signs that say, "I'm with you." Our final expression today is one that you might not hear as often in beginner English lessons, but it's incredibly common in everyday conversations. Fair enough. At first, this expression can seem a little confusing because it doesn't have one perfect translation. But once you understand how people use it, you'll probably start noticing it everywhere. Imagine your friend says, "I'm not going out tonight. I've had a really busy week, and I just want to stay home and relax." You might reply, "Fair enough." You're not saying they're right or wrong. You're simply saying, "I understand your decision," or "That seems reasonable." It's a very natural way to accept someone else's point of view. Let's think about another everyday situation. Imagine your friend tells you they're thinking about changing careers. They explain why they've been feeling unhappy at work and what they're hoping to do next. Instead of jumping in with advice right away, you could simply say, "That makes sense." Then give them a moment to continue. Sometimes that's exactly what people need. Have you ever noticed how conversations become easier when we don't feel the need to solve every problem? Very often, people aren't looking for answers. They're looking for someone who will listen, understand, and react naturally. I think that's one of the biggest differences between having a conversation and simply exchanging information. Now imagine someone tells you they've just started learning a new language. You might smile and say, "Oh, I know what you mean." If you've had the same experience, that small sentence creates an instant connection. Suddenly, you're no longer just listening to their story. You've become part of the conversation too. One thing I really enjoy about these expressions is that they don't require perfect English. They're simple enough for almost anyone to use, but they're also the kinds of reactions you'll hear every single day. That's encouraging, isn't it? Sometimes, sounding more natural isn't about learning difficult words. It's about using simple ones at the right moment. Here's something I'd like you to try this week. The next time you watch a film, a TV series, or even a YouTube interview in English, don't focus only on the main sentences. Pay attention to the little reactions between them. Count how many times you hear, "Really?" "Right," or "Exactly." I think you'll be surprised by how often they appear. The more you notice these expressions, the more naturally they'll become part of your own English. That's one of my favorite ways to learn. Instead of memorizing long vocabulary lists, you begin collecting little pieces of real conversations. And over time, Those small pieces come together to make your English sound more relaxed, confident, and natural. There's another reason I enjoy these expressions so much. They help remove the pressure of always having to say something clever. Sometimes we think every response has to be interesting or impressive, but in real life, that's not how conversations work. Most of the time, people simply want to know you're listening. And these small reactions communicate exactly that without requiring long or complicated sentences. Imagine you're having lunch with a coworker, and they tell you about a difficult week. Instead of immediately talking about your own experiences, you could simply respond with, "I see. That makes sense." Or, "Oh, I know what you mean." Those small reactions create space for them to finish their thoughts before the conversation naturally shifts back to you. Have you ever spoken to someone who always changes the subject back to themselves? It can be a little frustrating, can't it? One of the easiest ways to avoid doing that is by reacting first and speaking second. A short response like, "Really?" or "Exactly," tells the other person that you're still interested in their story before introducing your own. I also think it's worth remembering that silence isn't always a bad thing. We sometimes feel uncomfortable when there's a short pause, but pauses are a normal part of conversation. Instead of rushing to fill every quiet moment, you can simply smile, nod, or use one of these natural reactions. Very often, the other person will continue speaking on their own. Another nice thing about these expressions is that they work in almost every situation. You can use them with friends, coworkers, classmates, neighbors, and even people you've just met. Because they're simple and polite, they fit naturally into almost any conversation. That's one of the reasons you'll hear them so often in everyday English. Sometimes learners ask me, which one should I start using first? My answer is always the same. Choose the one that feels the most natural to you. You don't need to learn all of them today. Start with "really" or "that makes sense." Use it a few times, let it become part of your English, and then slowly add another expression. Learning a language isn't about collecting hundreds of new words every week. It's about becoming more comfortable using the words you already know. These small reactions are a perfect example of that. They're short, they're easy to remember, and they help conversations sound much more relaxed without making English feel more difficult. So here's a little challenge for you. During your next conversation in English, don't worry about using every expression we've talked about today. Just choose one. Listen carefully, wait for the right moment, and use it naturally. I think you'll notice something interesting. The conversation will probably feel smoother, and you'll feel more confident simply because you're participating instead of only waiting for your turn to speak. One last thing I'd like you to remember is that these expressions aren't just English vocabulary. They're communication tools. They help people feel heard, understood, and appreciated. And when someone feels that way, they're usually much more willing to continue the conversation. That's why these little reactions can have such a big impact. The next time you're listening to English, whether it's a podcast, a movie, or a conversation at work, try paying attention to these reactions instead of only the longer sentences. I think you'll start noticing that native speakers use them constantly. Once you hear them often enough, they'll begin to feel natural to you too. And don't worry if using these expressions feels a little unusual at first. That's completely normal. Every new habit feels unfamiliar in the beginning. The important thing isn't getting everything perfect. It's simply giving yourself the opportunity to practice a little more each day. Confidence grows through repetition, not perfection. If there's one idea I'd love you to take away from today's episode, it's this. Great conversations aren't created by people who always know the perfect thing to say. They're created by people who know how to listen, how to react, and how to make others feel comfortable. That's a skill you'll carry with you wherever English takes you. Before we finish, I'd like to leave you with a small challenge. This week, choose one conversation, just one, and focus on reacting more naturally. Use a simple, Really? That makes sense? Or exactly. Don't think about using every expression. Just enjoy the conversation and notice how those little reactions can make a surprisingly big difference. Before we finish today, I'd like you to remember something very simple. Speaking English naturally isn't only about learning new vocabulary or using perfect grammar. It's also about showing the other person that you're listening. Sometimes a single word like really or exactly can make someone feel more comfortable, and that small moment can completely change the conversation. So, this week, don't try to memorize every expression we've talked about today. Just choose one or two that feel natural to you and start using them. The more you hear them, the more you'll notice them, and before long, they'll become part of your own English. That's how natural communication grows, one small habit at a time. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly hope this episode helps you feel a little more confident the next time you're speaking English. Remember, every conversation is another opportunity to learn, connect with someone, and enjoy the process. Be patient with yourself, keep practicing, and celebrate every small step forward. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being here. I always enjoy sharing these moments with you, and I can't wait to see you again next time. Take care, keep practicing, and as always, I'll see you in the next episode.